My name is Margaret Campbell, and the day my husband took everything I had was the day silence became louder than any scream I could make. It didn't happen in court or with shouting in the driveway. It happened over breakfast, 2 eggs toast, and a man I thought I knew. He looked across the table and said, "I've made my decision, Maggie. I'm leaving." By the time my coffee turned cold, he was gone. By sunset, so was every dollar in our joint account. I remember the smell of his aftershave lingering in the kitchen. The checkbook was missing. The small box of savings bonds I'd kept in the drawer beside the fridge, gone. I walked through that house like someone had stolen not just my money, but the air itself. Every corner of that house carried the echo of his absence. After 27 years of marriage, I was alone, and the bank account read 2317. In our town of Bloomington, Indiana, everyone knows everyone's business. You can't buy milk at the Kroger without someone asking how you're doing. And when you're the woman left behind, people mean well, but pity cuts deeper than gossip. Mrs. Lee from church dropped off a casserole I couldn't swallow. My neighbor Helen hugged me in the driveway and whispered, "You'll find your footing, honey." But I wasn't sure if I even had ground to stand on. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, staring at the field behind the house. The fireflies flickered like tiny mocking stars. The man who'd once sworn to build a life with me had taken everything, our savings, the car, even the deed to the house we'd built together. The lawyer told me later it was technically legal that the assets were in his name from a refinance I'd signed years ago. Legal or not, it felt like theft of a different kind. I thought about all the years I'd cooked, budgeted, stretched every dollar when times were hard. When Tom lost his first job, I picked up extra shifts at the library. When his business failed, I sold my mother's piano to pay the bills. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because that's what wives in small towns do. We hold things together quietly, until the day the quiet breaks us. When he left, he didn't just take the money. He took my identity. For years, I was Tom's wife. Now I was the woman he left. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up watching headlights pass by on the county road, wondering if one of them might be him second-guessing his choice. But he never turned back. The next morning, the mortgage company called. I could either pay within 60 days or lose the house. I didn't have $60. I sold what I could, my jewelry, his old tools, even the oak dining table we'd bought after our 10th anniversary. Every sale felt like peeling away another layer of our life together. A week later, I walked into the local grocery store to apply for a job. The manager, Bill Johnson, had known Tom for years. He looked uncomfortable as he handed me the form. "Didn't think I'd ever see you in here for work, Margaret," he said. I smiled, though my stomach knotted. Neither did I, Bill, but here I am. The first paycheck was small, but the feeling of earning it myself, that was something no man could take. I'd forgotten that kind of pride. Each night, I came home to the echoing house, cooked for one, and forced myself to eat at the counter instead of the dining room where 2 plates used to sit. I avoided the radio, the news, anything that might mention his name. But small towns have long memories. Someone always brought him up. "Tom seems happy," they'd say. "He's got that new business in Indianapolis." I'd just nod, pretending it didn't burn. The loneliness was the hardest. It crept into mornings where the coffee pot brewed too much for one person, and into nights when the bed felt like a reminder of everything that had vanished. I started keeping a journal. Nothing fancy, just a notebook from the dollar store. The first page read, "Day 1. He took everything I had, but he didn't take me." As weeks passed, I learned small survival tricks. I stopped leaving the porch light on, it only made the emptiness glow brighter. I learned to fix a leaky faucet using a YouTube video. I started walking to church on Sundays because I couldn't afford gas, and somewhere along those walks I began to breathe again. Mrs. Green, an older widow who lived down the road, invited me to her kitchen one afternoon. "You need to bake something," she said. "It's impossible to stay bitter while making bread." I laughed, but she handed me her old mixer and a recipe for apple pie. That night, the smell of cinnamon filled my kitchen for the first time since he'd left. It felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself. When the foreclosure notice finally came, I didn't cry. I folded it neatly, placed it on the table, and whispered, "Take it. It's just wood and nails." The next day, I packed my clothes, my mother's Bible, and the notebook, and locked the door one last time. As I stood by the moving truck, the sun set behind the empty house. I realized something. Yes, he took everything tangible, but the woman standing in that driveway wasn't gone. She was still here, breathing, watching the light fade on a chapter that no longer belonged to her. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like the one who'd lost everything. I felt like someone starting from nothing, and maybe that was the better place to begin. After I left the house behind, I moved into a small apartment above a hardware store on the edge of town. The walls were thin enough that I could hear the hum of the refrigerators from the shop below, but it was cheap and safe, and for the first time in months, the space was mine. The first night I slept there, I didn't cry. I just lay awake listening to the creak of the ceiling fan, thinking, this is what starting over sounds like. My days began at dawn. I walked to the grocery store where I'd started working a 15-minute walk past the post office and the old diner that still smelled like bacon from the 1970s. My job wasn't glamorous, bagging groceries, stocking shelves, sweeping floors, but it paid in cash, and I needed that. Each dollar felt like a small rebellion against what he had taken. The customers were kind. A few recognized me. "You used to live out by Miller Road, right, Tom's wife?" they'd ask. I learned to smile and say, "Just Margaret now." The first few weeks were the hardest. My hands ached from standing all day. My back screamed when I got home, and every night I questioned whether life had any real second chances for a woman my age. But then little victories started to appear. I learned how to fix my coffee pot instead of buying a new one. I figured out that the thrift store down by Highway 37 had half-price Wednesdays. I planted herbs in old soup cans by the window, and they grew. Every sprout felt like proof that life didn't need to be fancy to be full. On Sundays, I walked to church. It wasn't about faith at first, it was about having somewhere to be where people smiled at you. That's where I met Dorothy Green, a widow in her 70s, with a laugh that filled the whole sanctuary. She invited me to her house after service. "You need some company," she said, "and maybe a slice of pie." Dorothy's kitchen smelled like butter and cinnamon. She taught me how to bake her famous apple pies. "You know," she said while rolling dough, "men like your Tom think they're taking something from us, but they never realize we were the ones keeping the whole thing standing." That line stayed with me for weeks. By spring, I was baking 2 pies a week, then 4. Dorothy convinced me to bring them to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. I sold out by noon. One man told me, "This tastes like my grandmother's kitchen." I smiled all day after that. For the first time in a long time, I felt useful again, not as someone's wife, but as myself. The apartment began to feel like home. I hung curtains I found at a yard sale and painted the walls a soft cream. I bought a used radio and listened to old country songs while baking at night. I wrote in my journal each evening, ending every entry with a line I'd promised myself. You can't rebuild what was stolen, but you can grow something new where it used to be. Still, there were hard days. Bills piled up. The old car I bought with cash broke down twice. Some nights, I ate canned soup for dinner and wrapped myself in a quilt to avoid turning on the heater. But even then, I told myself this was my life, now imperfect, humble, but honest. One afternoon, as I was closing my market stall, a man approached me. "You're Margaret, right?" "Tom Campbell's ex." I froze. He continued. "He's doing well. Built some kind of contracting company in Indianapolis. Got remarried, too." Ladies loaded. He said it casually, like gossip. I nodded, smiled, and went back to packing pies. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought of all the ways Tom used to say, "One day we'll have more." He just never said who we meant. I imagined him in a big house laughing, forgetting the woman who once paid his bills and sold her mother's piano for his dream. But then I looked around my little apartment, the herbs growing on the sill, the smell of cinnamon still lingering, and realized something strange. I didn't want his life anymore. It was made of noise and greed. Mine was quiet, but real. Dorothy once told me, "When you have nothing, you learn what really matters." She was right. I had a roof work and the dignity of doing it myself. For the first time, I didn't need anyone's name beside mine. Every Friday evening, I'd sit by the window, drink tea from a chipped cup, and watch the town quiet down. The neon sign from the hardware store below flickered through my curtains, spelling "open" in shaky red letters. It felt like a message meant just for me. Years later, when people asked how I survived it all, I'd tell them the truth: I didn't survive, I rebuilt. One pie, one smile, one breath at a time. By the time 2 years had passed, I'd stopped flinching when I heard his name. But small towns have long memories, and in Bloomington, news travels faster than trains. One morning, while I was restocking flour at the cafe, a customer mentioned it casually. Tom had remarried. Her name was Linda Parker, a widow from Indianapolis with money from her late husband's insurance and a house twice the size of ours ever was. I didn't react right away. I remember just nodding, wiping my hands on my apron, and saying good for him. But when I locked up that evening, I sat alone in the cafe's back office and stared at the empty register drawer, realizing I hadn't felt angry, just hollow. Linda was everything I wasn't: younger, glamorous, wealthy, the kind of woman who wore heels to church and carried purses that cost more than my month's rent. I knew their type of story. Around here, folks talked. "He's finally happy," they'd say, as if happiness were something money could buy. At first, I tried not to care. I poured myself into the cafe, the one I'd started with a $3,000 loan from Dorothy and a handshake promise. Margaret's table was small, 6 booths, a counter, and a chalkboard menu that changed every day, but people loved it. We served soups, pies, and stories. Folks came for lunch and stayed just to talk. It became the place where everyone gathered: teachers, farmers, retired couples. I'd stand behind the counter with my apron dusted in flour and say, "How's your week been?" "Jim or Dorothy? You want your usual." The cafe gave me something I hadn't had in years: a reason to wake up excited. Still, on slow afternoons, I'd wonder about him. Was he happy in that big house with Linda? Did he ever think of the woman who once fixed his truck when it broke down in winter? The one who stayed when the money ran out? I told myself I didn't care. But late at night, when the radio hummed softly in my apartment, I'd catch myself whispering his name. Facebook made it worse. One of my old church friends posted a photo. Tom and Linda smiling on a cruise ship, drinks in hand, sunlight gleaming off their designer sunglasses. I stared at it for a long time before closing my laptop. The next day, I took down the old wedding photo I'd kept in a drawer just in case and threw it in the trash. Not angrily, just done. Bloomington had a rhythm, a quiet honesty. Here you earned your reputation every day. I wasn't the woman people pitied anymore. I was Margaret from the cafe. When folks mentioned my name, they smiled. That was enough. One afternoon, a traveling journalist stopped by for coffee. He'd heard about the cafe's popularity and wanted to feature it in a local magazine piece called Small Town Women Big Hearts. He asked for a quote, and I said, "Sometimes life burns your house down, so you'll build one that fits you better." That line ended up in print, and customers started quoting it back to me. Business grew. I hired 2 part-timers, including a high school girl named Sarah, who reminded me of myself at 17, eager but unsure. She asked once, "Miss Margaret, how do you stay so calm about everything?" I smiled. "You learn that storms pass whether you curse them or not." Then one Sunday, Dorothy brought me a clipping from the Indianapolis Journal. It was a photo of Tom and Linda at a ribbon-cutting event. Tom in a suit, Linda in pearls. The headline read, "Campbell Construction Expands Across Indiana." Dorothy looked uneasy. "You all right, honey?" "I'm fine," I said, folding the paper neatly and tucking it away. But inside, I felt a flicker, not jealousy, not pain, just recognition. He's still chasing more, I thought. And I'm finally enough. That night after closing the cafe, I walked to the edge of town where the fields opened up beneath a pink sunset. I thought about how my life had shrunk in size but grown in peace. Tom had always needed to prove something to himself, to others, to the world. I just needed to prove I could stand on my own 2 feet. Weeks later, a former co-worker of his came in for lunch. Over a bowl of chili, he mentioned that Tom was buying expensive properties and taking risky loans. "He's living big, Margaret," the man said with a chuckle. "Linda's got the money, but he's running the show. You know how he is." I nodded politely. Of course I knew how he was. Ambition with no anchor always sinks itself. After that, I stopped thinking about him. My days filled with customers, recipes, laughter, and quiet nights spent reading. Life had settled into something soft and manageable. Still deep down, I knew one thing about men like Tom Campbell: they don't stop until they crash. And when that day came, I hoped I'd be far enough away not to hear the sound. By the spring of the 3rd year, Margaret's Table wasn't just a cafe anymore. It was the heartbeat of the town. Kids stopped by after school for cookies. Old men came in for coffee and to talk about weather and corn prices. The cafe felt alive, and so did I. People called me Miss Margaret, and they said the place had a way of making them feel calm, like home. But behind the soft glow of the cafe lights, I carried a quiet truth I hadn't forgiven him. Not yet. I told myself I had moved on, that my new life was proof of that. But forgiveness wasn't the same as freedom. And late at night, I still wondered what he would think if he saw me now. One Thursday, a customer came in, a woman I didn't recognize, dressed too fancy for our town. She ordered a slice of apple pie, took one bite, and smiled. "You're Margaret Campbell, right? I've heard about this place. My husband does business with your ex, Tom." She said it lightly, like commenting on the weather. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "How's he doing these days?" She stirred her coffee. "Busy as ever. Big house, big contracts. But between you and me, people say he's stretched thin, always chasing one more deal." I thanked her for stopping by, and after she left, I went into the kitchen and stared at the sink for a long time. Some lessons take years to see clearly, and one of them is this: when a person's hunger is for power, not peace, they'll never feel full. A few months later, Dorothy fell ill. I visited her every evening after closing the cafe, bringing soup and pie. She'd sit up in bed, smile, and tell me, "Maggie, you've built something beautiful. You found your strength." I told her she'd helped me do it. "You just needed reminding," she said. "You always had it." When she passed that winter, I closed the cafe for a day and baked her favorite pie cherry and left a slice by her chair. After Dorothy's funeral, I started keeping a small, framed photo of her behind the counter. It reminded me that kindness could be a kind of armor. Then came the call I didn't expect. One of Tom's old employees tracked me down through Facebook. He said, "Margaret, I thought you should know. Tom's business is in trouble. He overextended bad loans too many projects. Linda's pulling her money out." I didn't know what to say. He went on, "It's rough. They're selling off assets. She's moving out." I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat alone in the cafe lights off the street outside, quiet except for the hum of the street lamp. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. For years, I'd imagined this moment the fall of the man who'd taken everything, but when it finally came, it didn't look like victory. It looked like balance being restored. A week later, one of my regulars brought in a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Campbell Construction Declares Bankruptcy." The photo showed Tom leaving a courthouse eyes-down tie loosened. I didn't clip it or save it. I just read it once and slipped it into the trash. That night, I drove out to the old house on Miller Road. Someone else owned it now. The shutters were a different color, but the porch light was still the same. I parked on the side of the road and sat there, remembering the night I'd left it all behind. Then I whispered to the quiet road, "You can keep it." In small-town America, news like that travels fast. Folks asked if I'd heard about Tom. "You must feel relieved." I just smiled and said I wish him peace. They didn't know what to do with that answer. The truth was I did wish him peace, because when you've rebuilt yourself from the ashes, you stop needing someone else to burn. As the seasons turned, the cafe became busier. People loved the story of the woman who'd lost everything and started again. Sometimes younger women came in and asked how I did it. I'd pour them coffee and tell them the truth. You can't stop people from leaving, but you can decide what stays with you when they do. The following spring, I got a letter in the mail. It was postmarked Indianapolis. The handwriting stopped my breath. It was his. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. It read, "Maggie, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I think about you. I was wrong. About everything. I lost what mattered because I thought I could replace it. Turns out I can't. I hope you're happy." I folded the letter twice and placed it in the drawer beneath my receipts. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there feeling the weight of it, the full circle of everything. Sometimes life doesn't give you closure in the way you imagine. It just gives you a moment quiet enough to see that you no longer need it. The news of Tom's downfall spread like summer thunder, fast and loud. It came first as whispers in line at the grocery store, then as sighs at the post office, and finally as a headline in the Herald Times local developer files for bankruptcy. I was brewing coffee when one of my customers left the paper open on the counter. I didn't need to read it. The photo said everything. Tom in his once tailored suit, hair unkempt, eyes sunken. The man who had left me with nothing now looked like he owned even less. At first I tried to ignore it, but the truth has a way of finding you, especially in a small town. People meant well, but their curiosity stung. "Did you hear Margaret?" they'd say in hushed tones. "He lost everything." I'd nod, refill their cups, and smile. What could I say? That I'd spent years wishing for justice, and now that it had arrived, it didn't feel like victory. Just quiet closure. One afternoon, I closed the cafe early and drove toward Indianapolis. I didn't plan to stop. I just wanted to see for myself. His company's office building was locked, a for lease sign hanging crookedly on the door. I sat in my car engine running and thought about the years I'd spent rebuilding my life from ashes. Somewhere deep down, I whispered, "You took everything, but you never took me." When I came back to Bloomington, the air felt lighter. The fall had finally balanced the scales. A few weeks later, a gray sedan pulled into the gravel lot outside the cafe. I was wiping down tables when the bell above the door chimed. I didn't look up at first, but then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade. Maggie. The rag froze in my hand. There he was, Tom Campbell. He looked older, thinner, smaller somehow. His once broad shoulders hunched, like the weight of life had finally settled there. His suit was worn, and his hands shook slightly as he held his hat. The confident grin I'd once known was gone. I didn't speak right away, just looked at him. "You look good," he said. Voice cracking. Better than I deserve to say. I gestured toward a booth. "You can sit." He did, and for a few seconds we just listened to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking wall clock. Finally, he said, "I lost it all, Maggie. Linda left when the money ran out. The business, the cars, everything. I thought I could rebuild like before, but I was wrong." I poured him a cup of coffee black, just how he used to take it. "You built on sand," I said softly. He nodded. "You always warned me about chasing too much." He took a sip, eyes wet. "You were right. You always were." For a moment, he looked at me like a man seeing something holy, like he'd realized the full cost of what he'd thrown away. "I don't have anywhere to go," he said. I thought maybe you could help me, just until I get back on my feet." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Help you?" I repeated, not out of cruelty, but disbelief. "I know," he said quickly. "I don't deserve it. But you always had that heart too kind for your own good." Kind. The word lingered in the air. It used to mean weakness to him. Now it was his only hope. I walked to the window, looking out at the afternoon sun spilling across Main Street. Kids were biking past, laughter echoing faintly. I turned back to him. "I'll tell you something, Tom," I said. "I spent years thinking of what I'd say if you ever came back. I imagined yelling, maybe crying. But now that you're here, I don't feel any of that." He waited, eyes pleading. "I feel sorry for you," I said finally, "because you never learned what enough meant. You thought love was a transaction, and now you've got nothing left to trade." He looked down. "So that's it then?" I nodded. "That's it." He opened his mouth as if to argue, but stopped. The air between us felt still final. As he stood to leave, he placed a $20 bill on the table. "For the coffee," he said. I looked at it and shook my head. "Keep it. You'll need it more than I do." He hesitated, then turned and walked out the door. I watched through the window as he climbed into that old sedan and drove off, disappearing down the road toward nowhere. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just stood there in the quiet cafe, the smell of coffee lingering in the air, realizing that life had finally come full circle. That evening, I closed early again. The sun was setting low golden light, washing across the sign that read, "Margaret's Table, Fresh Starts Served Daily." I sat on the porch outside with a slice of pie and whispered to the breeze. You can take everything from someone, but not their peace unless they give it away. And for the first time since he left me, I felt truly untouchable. I found him again before I ever planned to. It was almost winter, the cafe quiet, except for the sound of wind pushing against the door. I was closing up when a shadow crossed the window. When the bell chimed, I already knew who it was. Tom stood there, the same worn coat, his eyes hollow but soft this time. "Evening, Maggie," he said. His voice sounded tired, almost gentle. I didn't answer. I just motioned for him to come in out of the cold. He hesitated like a boy outside a church door, then stepped inside, hands stuffed in his pockets. "I didn't mean to bother you," he said. "I just didn't know where else to go." He looked smaller now, like the air had gone out of him. I could see he hadn't eaten well, cheeks, thin knuckles, red from cold. I set a cup of coffee in front of him the same way I'd done the last time. He stared into the cup for a long while before speaking. "You were right about everything," he whispered. "About greed. About love. About what matters. I thought I was building an empire, but all I built was distance from everyone who ever cared." I didn't interrupt. Sometimes silence tells the truth louder than words. He looked up, tears in his eyes. "You know I used to laugh at you for keeping every receipt, every grocery list. Said you were too careful. But you were the one who knew the value of things. I only knew the price." That line hit deep. It wasn't apology enough to erase years, but it was honest. He asked if I'd heard about Linda. I nodded. She'd married again, someone with more money, less patience. "Guess we both learned something," I said. He smiled sadly. "I learned too late." For a moment I felt a flicker of the old ache, but not the old love. It was compassion, the kind you feel for someone who's finally seen their reflection. "I'm staying at the shelter downtown," he said. "They need volunteers. I fix things for them. Leaky pipes, broken chairs. Feels good working with my hands again." I nodded. "You were always good with tools. Just use them for the wrong things." He chuckled weakly. "Yeah, guess I finally figured out what to build." When he left that night, he thanked me for the coffee and said, "I'll pay you back." I told him he already had, just by showing up different. I didn't see him again for a long time. But sometimes the volunteers at church mentioned him, said he'd found steady work, kept to himself, helped fix things around the community center. I was glad for that. Redemption doesn't always come with applause. It comes with small, quiet choices. One spring morning, I got a letter from the shelter. It wasn't from Tom, it was about him. He'd passed away, suddenly, a heart attack. They said he'd been saving money to start a handyman business, and that the last person he helped was an elderly widow whose fence had fallen after a storm. He'd fixed it for free. I sat at the cafe table holding that letter, feeling the old ache again, softer this time, like the wind after rain. I closed the cafe early that day and walked to the river. The air smelled of lilac and fresh soil. I stood there for a long while and whispered, "I forgive you." Not for him, but for me. In the months that followed, I noticed how peace settles in not like lightning, but like dawn. Customers came and went, pies baked and cooled, seasons turned. Sometimes I'd see couples holding hands at the counter, and I'd smile not with envy, but gratitude. I kept his last letter tucked in the same drawer as my old journal. Every now and then, I'd open it to remind myself how far I'd come. People say revenge is about getting even, but I learned that real revenge is rising so quietly, the person who wronged you has to look up to find your peace. Now, when young women ask for advice, I tell them, don't measure your worth by who stays. Measure it by what you build after they leave. And each night before closing, I look at the cafe sign glowing softly outside Margaret's table. Fresh starts served daily. Because that's what life really is, a second chance, waiting for someone brave enough to take it. It's been years since that last winter. The seasons have turned so many times that even the trees outside Margaret's table look different now, older, steadier, like they've seen it all and decided to keep standing anyway. Life became soft again. My mornings started with the sound of the percolator and the smell of fresh bread, and my evenings ended with laughter from customers who'd turned into family. The cafe wasn't just a business anymore. It was my proof that peace could grow where ruin once lived. But sometimes in the quiet before opening, I'd think of him. Tom. Not in anger, not in longing, just as a name that used to hold too much weight. I'd wonder if he ever found the peace he was chasing. One day I got my answer. A letter arrived at the cafe addressed simply to Monsieur Campbell. The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar. Inside was a short note from a man named Pastor Miller at the shelter where Tom had volunteered. It read, "Dear Mrs. Campbell, I thought you might like to know that Tom Campbell passed away last month. He spoke kindly of you in his last days. Said you taught him what real strength looked like. He asked that we send you his thanks for forgiving him even when he hadn't earned it." There was no photograph, no obituary clipping, just those words. I sat there for a long time holding that letter, feeling the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of the years between us. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't a door you open for someone else. It's a window you open for yourself, so the air can finally change. That night, I walked down to the river after closing. The water moved slow, reflecting the orange streetlights. I thought about all the versions of myself that River had seen: the woman who lost everything, the one who started again, the one who finally stopped needing to win. I pulled from my coat pocket a small paper napkin, one of the first from the cafe, with the words I'd written long ago, "Fresh starts served daily." I folded it twice, let it fall into the river, and watched as the current carried it away. A gust of wind brushed my face, and for the first time, I felt something close to grace. The next morning, a young woman came into the cafe. She looked nervous, clutching a notebook. "Are you Miss Margaret?" she asked. "Yes, honey," I said, smiling. "I've been thinking of opening a bakery," she said. "Everyone told me to talk to you first. They said you know what it's like to start with nothing." Her words made me laugh softly. "I suppose I do," I said. I poured her a cup of coffee, slid a slice of apple pie across the counter, and said, "Let's start there. Tell me what you've got and what you want to build." As she began to talk, I realized something simple and true. My story wasn't about loss anymore. It was about legacy. The kind you build not with wealth, but with kindness, steadiness, and truth. Before closing that night, I added a new sign beneath the cafe's window. "Peace is the sweetest revenge." The regulars noticed it the next morning and nodded knowingly. They didn't need the backstory, they could feel it. Sometimes people ask if I ever remarried. I always smile and say, "No, I'm already taken by my own life." I still bake every morning before sunrise, still write in my journal before bed. Some nights when the cafe is quiet and the lights are low, I whisper to myself, "You did it, Margaret. You really did it." Because after all those years, I learned that the truest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's living so right that you stop needing to. And when the customers leave and the chairs are turned up and the neon sign flickers closed, I look at the empty tables and feel the kind of stillness that only comes after a long fight with life and finally making peace with it. So if you're listening to this story somewhere out there, maybe holding your own heartbreak, remember this: you can lose everything and still not be lost. You can start over at any age. And one day you'll look back and realize the people who left you behind only cleared the path for who you were meant to become. True revenge isn't anger, it's peace. And peace, my dear, is the one thing they can never take from you.